A very good afternoon, everyone. I am Kitayun Mistry, the General Secretary of the Student Council, and on behalf of Government Law College, Mumbai, I welcome you all to the final stage of the three-day international conference on the topic, The World Constitution, a New Horizon of Human Rights. It is the action and not the fruit of the action that is important. You have to do the right thing. It may not be in your power, may not be in your time that there may be any fruit. But that does not mean that you stop doing the right thing. You may never know what are the results from your actions. But if you do nothing, there will be no result. This is what Mahatma Gandhi said. And this is exactly the thought process which brings organizations such as the WCPA and Government Law College to work towards the World Constitution. With this in mind, I would like to welcome our chief guest for the day, Professor Alexander Christoph Fischer. We're honored by your presence, sir. We're also very grateful to have with us our principal, Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, along with our co-conveners, our senior professors, faculty members, multiple dignitaries, academicians, and students from all over the globe. This three-day international conference has been conducted under the leitmotif of Azadi 75, which is one of the 75 such programs on constitutional law that are being conducted by Government Law College, Mumbai and commemorate 75 years of Indian independence. Before we commence today's session, I would like to request our very own student, Astha Sharma, to sing a special song to welcome our audience. Astha?
Hi, hello everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Asmita Sharma, and on behalf of GLC Mumbai, I'd like to welcome you all through this song. स्वागत की सुमधुर बेला में भाव पुष्प क्या अर्पित कर दें आज कृतार्थ प्रफुल्लित मन हम कौन शब्द से वंदन कर दे बह रही पवन मादकता से हर पल पर है उल्लास नया मिलने को है वरदान हमें साधना परिधि से नया नया इस शुभ अवसर के आने पर क्या पलक पावड़े बिछवा दे स्वागत की सुमधुर बेला में भाव पुष्प क्या अर्पित कर दे आज कृतार्थ प्रफुल्लित मन हम कौन शब्द से वंदन कर दे Welcome to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Astha. That was very beautiful and melodious. I would now like to request our convener, Professor Nusrat Sheikh Ma'am, to kindly deliver the welcome address.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin with a quote. I quote, "Injustice anywhere is threat to justice everywhere," unquote, by Martin Luther King. I, Mrs. Nusrat Afroz Sheikh, Assistant Professor, Government Law College, Mumbai, the convener of 3 days international conference on World Constitution, a New Horizon of Human Rights, welcome you all, the dignitaries joined us for this mega event of the celebration of India's 75th year of independence in the leitmotif of Azadi 75. In continuation with the most propounded way to come to the final conclusion of the 3 days marathon activities involving speeches and address by the world-known dignitaries, sharing their lifetime experiences and wisdom with the audience present over the virtual medium across the globe. The Honorable Chief Guest for today's valedictory function, Professor Dr. Alexander Christopher Fischer, I thank you, sir, for accepting the invitation and gracing the occasion. I would also like to thank the president of today's valedictory function, the Honorable Principal, Government Law College, Mumbai, as well as the organizing secretary of the International Conference, Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, Madam, for being the president for today's valedictory function. Thank you so much, Madam. The chief guest of the inaugural function, Professor Dr. Glenn Martin, President of the World Constitution and Parliament Association. I welcome all the members of the Governing Council of Government Law College, Mumbai, as well as all the stakeholders of their continuous support and guidance. I welcome all the participants and paper presenters whose research papers were selected here for presentation in the international conference. For their active participation, I would like to welcome all the principals and the faculty members of the law and non-law colleges who have participated in the international conference. Likewise, I would like to welcome all the students for participating and enjoying the intellectual fest, which would be life-changing moment for them. It's my honor and privilege to welcome the faculty members from the Government Law College, Mumbai. Likewise, I welcome Senior Professor Dr. Rachita Ratho, Madam, Associate Professor, Government Law College, Mumbai. I welcome Mrs. Kavita Herao, Assistant Professor, Government Law College, Mumbai. I also welcome Mr. P.B. Duffel, Assistant Professor, Government Law College, Mumbai. Likewise, I welcome all the faculty members, full-time, visiting, and adjunct faculty at the Government Law College, Mumbai for their guidance, assistance, and continuous support for making this international conference a grand success. I would like to welcome Ms. Ketayu Mistry, General Secretary, Student Council, Government Law College, Mumbai, who also heading the students coordination, taken all the efforts in managing all the preparations and arrangements. I take this opportunity to welcome all our students working hard under different committees and heads for this international conference. I welcome you all from bottom of my heart. I also welcome all the members of the non-teaching staff and the team of technical staff who helped in making this conference possible on virtual medium. The presentations, deliberations, analysis, the keynote addresses, opening the vast channels of knowledge allowed the paper presenters to take the presentation and discussion to the academic threshold of legal, social, political, and philosophical parameters. The deliberation and the discussions would be documented and preserved in the form of ebook on the subject matter, and the gist and the extract of to be formulated into the resolution, which would be flowed before this Augustus Galaxy, spearheaded by the philosophical teachers and the mentors of vision and prosperity. I thank the organizing committee and the organizing secretary, Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, Madam, for showing confidence in me and conferred the responsibility to shoulder the role of the convener of this 3-day international conference. I thank you all for your unconditional support and assistance throughout this mega event, the 3-day international conference, a grand success. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I would now like to take this opportunity to introduce Professor Alexander Fischer. Sir is a professor at the O.P. Jindal Global University, specializing in comparative constitutional law, with particular reference to India. Before joining Jindal Global Law School, he was a lecturer at the SOAS School of Law, University of London, and at the South Asia Institute at the Department of Political Science at University of Heidelberg. Professor Fischer was a visiting scholar at the Global Legal Studies Center at University of Wisconsin Law School in 2012 and a visiting fellow at the Center for the Study of Law and Governance at the Jawaharlal Nehru University from 2004 to 2005. with research grants from the Indian Council for Cultural Relations and the German Academic Exchange Service. He holds degrees from the London School of Economics and Political Science and the University of Heidelberg. Sir's most recent publication is a co-edited book, State and Society in South Asia, Themes for Assertion and Recognition. He was also an assistant series editor for the Constitutional Systems of the World and a deputy editor for the Heidelberg Papers in South Asian and Comparative Politics. We're extremely honored by your presence, sir, and I would now like you to invite our gathering.
Hello. Shall I? Yeah. Well, I think.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You're audible, sir.
Wonderful. So, dear Professor Vaidya, dear Professor Nusrat, dear members of the organizing committee, especially the students, and also other members of this wonderful dais, and above all, a big namaskar and welcome to all those watching this live stream event, wherever you are. I am exceptionally happy that I am here with you today. The idea of a world constitution is absolutely fascinating. And so when I saw the email from the Government Law College, that already was a highlight in itself, because I have heard so much about the institution and I value it so much. But then especially seeing the conference theme, that was really delightful. And it's a privilege to talk about this topic, not just because we all know in a way that a world constitution is a necessity and has been discussed as a necessity for a long time. But I think also the idea of something as ambitious, utopian, maybe even science fiction to some extent, not in a bad sense, yeah, more stressing the science part than the fiction sense. I think a conference theme like this really opens up enormous spaces for creative thinking, spaces which are usually closed. So as a keynote speaker, I also have this considerable freedom in the way that I want to address this topic. And I have prepared for you a couple of observations, big picture ideas, which I would like to narrate in a sort of thick brushstroke fashion. And I also wanted to pay particular attention to a number of visual aids. The reason for that is that the visual aids that you will see in my PowerPoint presentation allow us to jump back and forth across time and space. And I think that this form of time travel is sort of an ideal method to think about the history of the future. So there are a number of authors who have picked up this idea of a history of the future, where they have looked at the past and current trends to write a narrative about what's going to happen further. And I think this is very useful for thinking about the evolution of the world constitution. And for me, when I look at the long history of written constitutions, starting with the US Constitution, when I look at the long history and when I take a global perspective, I'm always surprised to see that things that seemed impossible in the past, impossible in the sense that people might have thought they would never change, then do change. And after a considerable amount of time, when we look back to the past, we actually then think of the past as an impossibility. It seems impossible to go backward. And I think that is a good way of thinking about the world constitution. So I just start by showing you a couple of slides. Let me know if this does not work. 1 second, please. Okay. Sorry. For some reason, we jumped sort of towards the end of the presentation. But what you should all see now, and please alert me if it's not working.
It's visible.
Okay, great. Yeah. So you see the great Abraham Lincoln and you see the great Dr. Ambedkar. And I'll tell you a little bit more later on why I picked these two images for this talk. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about, I have thought about three themes. The first theme I simply call aspiration. The second theme is so aspiration in constitutions in the past, aspirations in global constitutionalism, aspiration in the constitutions of the world. Then I would say a second theme must be, since the world constitution has such a strong federal dimension, to show how it's evolving in a bottom-up fashion. And I give a couple of examples for that. And then the third theme I wanted to address, again, the world constitution movement has a very strong linkage to environmental concerns. And I think what we used to think about as environmental issues, you know, that air pollution crosses a boundary or that plastic pollution in the ocean affects the entire world. I think climate change adds a new dimension to this, in the sense that it fundamentally challenges the social contract upon which contemporary state constitutions and also the international legal system is based. So I think there's a new phase coming, thus opening up a new door of legitimacy for the quest of a global constitution. So these would be my three themes. And just to start with this idea of aspiration, a lot of this goes back to an article by an American scholar, Hartog, from 1987, when he talks about the Constitution of Aspiration. And he takes away constitutional law out of the realm of, you know, a legalistic system of rules and institutional arrangements. And instead, he highlights the operation of constitutions as a system of culturing meaning and shared aspirations, perceptions, identities, and solidarities, both at the individual, but also at the collective level. And for a global constitution, this would also extend to networks, NGOs, civil society that conceptualizes itself in a global manner. So if you look at this map from 1897, you see the British Empire, right? And it looks like this enormous wall. It seems undefeatable and it seems impossible, right? To think about a constitutional future that is radically different from this map. But of course, this is exactly what people have done, right? Just like today, you have met online, otherwise you would have met in Mumbai, to discuss the evolution of global constitutional institutions in the same way people have met to talk about the future of an independent India, a constitution of India, constitutional reform in India. And so this has not just happened in state institutions. If you go to this wonderful website by the Bangalore Center for Law and Governance, you know, they give you the entire history and the documents of various constitutional actors. These could be individuals. You know, there's a book, A Gandhian Constitution for a Free India. There's a socialist vision for the constitution. Then there's the Karachi Resolution. So all of these things that you have heard, but essentially the idea is to get people together into a room and to debate these radical ideas, right? So instead of sticking to this map, these people turned everything on its head, right? And looked at things in a radically different fashion. And I think that's also something that you have done in your conference. And I really applaud the effort that you have undertaken during the last 3 days. You know how the story ends. It is successful. And as I said, we can no longer go back in our imagination, and we cannot imagine a world in which India is not free and independent. And as a constitutional law scholar, we cannot imagine a world without the Indian constitution, because it is so central to the entire decolonization process after the Second World War. Nevertheless, let's keep in mind that all constitutions will come to an end, all constitutional arrangements. And I wanted to draw your attention to a statistical fact, namely that most constitutions have an average lifespan of 19 years. This has been, this result, we have learned this from a wonderful study by Professor Ginsberg and two co-authors on the endurance of national constitutions. They have looked at all the constitutions over the last 250 years or so, and they have studied sort of their birth and their death, and they have calculated an average lifespan of constitutions. A funny little anecdote: when Jefferson debated and wrote letters about the US Constitution, he once speculated that the US Constitution should last about 19 years, because he said then the next generation will be there and the previous generation should not govern the next generation. So this idea that you have a constitutional text that lasts for hundreds of years actually was not part of the imagination of the American founding fathers. But you can see how powerful this idea of a constitution is. Every time we have a new country, we also have a new constitution, and there's barely any country left in the world that decides against governing itself with a written constitution. Yeah, of course, there's always a gap between the written constitution and the constitutional reality. If you look at the North Korean constitution, it actually looks quite good on paper, but of course, the reality is a completely different question. There's also always constant constitutional change. Of course, the more constitutions they are, the more they are amended. But I'm just showing you this work, this slide from the same book by Professor Ginsberg, just to draw your attention to the fact how alive constitutional developments are, and all the things that are constantly being added, taken out, and changed in constitutional texts, right? So when you think about the future and climate change, right, I already would like to start you thinking about how constitutions will have to be changed to accommodate the challenges that climate change will bring about for all of us, because I have a feeling that if we are not prepared for it, to do it to accommodate these changes in a constitutional manner, that very often we will slide into emergency measures to address the crises that climate change is definitely going to bring about. Also, there is, of course, constantly new constitutional texts. Kenya, think of your neighboring country, Nepal. Yeah, so it's not that when we're talking about the World Constitution Day or a World Constitution, it's not that we're talking about a status quo. You've just seen that all constitutions are constantly changing, and at the same time also there are always new constitutions being brought into existence. There's Kenya, and at the moment I would say the most interesting developments, or one of the most interesting developments, is happening in Chile. That's interesting for us because they pay a particular attention to climate change and the consequences of climate change. Yeah, so there are a lot of constitutional texts, but of course also, you see this here quite nicely with the people lying on the floor for the idea, of a new constitution, not just on their knees, but the whole body stretched out. There's something that constitutional law scholars often talk about, which is called constitutional faith, right? Very famous book by Sanford Levinson. If you read the 1989 edition, don't forget that in the 2011 edition, he's written a new foreword where he talks about his constitutional faith in the American Constitution. But the whole point of this idea of constitutional faith is, again, to take it out of the realm of the merely textual or technical or jurisprudential. And there are actually a lot of analogies and similarities between constitutional language and specific types of religious language. There's a book on this, Theocracy, by Professor Ran Herschel. You could also use the shortcut of a civil religion, right? We don't believe in a religious text, but there are forms of belief, aspiration, faith in a secular constitutional text. And so Sanford Levinson has created for us the shortcut expression of constitutional faith. Examples from India are manifold. Yeah, you will find this everywhere. And of course, Dr. Ambedkar is such a perfect figure for this. And again, once you look at constitutional history long-term, who would have thought it possible that a Dalit becomes the founding father, the father of the Indian Constitution, is in charge of drafting, presides over the proceedings. Yeah? And nowadays, if you travel through India, there's no other Indian of whom you will find so many statues as of Dr. Ambedkar, and not just statues erected by the state, but also privately funded displays of admiration for him. That is the fundamental ingredient in making constitutions work, right? It's not just a distinction between constitutions and constitutionalism, it's also the combination of constitutional text and constitutional culture, constitutional faith, right? There's an ingredient that, if it's missing, undermines the vibrancy of a constitution. So I think the artist then who was inspired by the Lincoln Memorial and took this idea to the Ambedkar Park in Lucknow, that artist was on to something, right? I mean, I've never found out who the artist was. Maybe someday I will. If anybody knows, please contact me. I would love to know. Yeah, but again, you can see there is also a global language emerging for constitutional faith. It's not just that certain values are spreading. I'll give you some example later on. But it's also the way we approach the constitutional text, the way we draft it. And there's really a global framework, global standards are emerging. A couple of other examples where we see radical constitutional change that seems unimaginable at first, right? So you have slavery and the infamous Dred Scott decision in the United States, which supports the slave trade. Then you have the Civil War and the 13th and the 14th Amendment. Constitutions start out by using the word man in a very gendered way. The texts are very gendered. But already right from the start, you have Olympe de Gouges sitting there in Paris, taking the Declaration of the Rights of Man and crossing out the gendered language and putting in the word female. A lot of earlier constitutions had no women in the Constituent Assembly, then very few. In Germany, it was 4. In India, I think it was 13. Yeah. But of course, nowadays, that is completely different. If today we make a constitution, one of the first things that one looks out for in a Constituent Assembly is participation of women. Another constitutional story where we see is the disappearance of racial discrimination. And I don't mean that this disappears in real world. I mean that there is a constitutional consensus emerging that racial discrimination cannot be legal. right? So there's no state support for legal discrimination in legal systems. This is also emerging as a global constitutional value. You could also take the example of chattel slavery, which is abolished over a longer period of time. So this picture here is from South Africa. And then in 1996, you have one of the most modern constitutions, inspired in many ways by India. We studied the Indian constitution very carefully and then articulated in a more modern language, the same ideas and principles, but in a legally more readable form for the common citizen, I think. And I would always encourage you to take a good look at the South African Constitution, because it takes a lot of the ideas that you will find in the fundamental rights part and also in the directive principles, but it just frames them differently legally. So this might be something that's interesting for you. So to understand, I think, this trend of more and more constitutions, our faith and support in the idea of global constitutional institutions is driven a lot by this constitutional faith, right? You could call it a fetishism of constitutions, or you could use this image that our thinking is, shifting, that there are certain similarities between religious law, constitutional law, that make it easier for us to invest meaning in constitutional texts that we usually will never invest in other legal texts, right? I mean, nobody swears an oath on a regulation of insurance law or something, right? Or nobody would say there's a faith in patent law or something. Whereas for constitutional law, you will find these ideas and this terminology no matter which country you study. Okay, so the aspirational side of the World Constitution, that was sort of the first part of things that I wanted to talk about with you. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of a federal world constitution. So most of the authors who work on the idea of global governance structures emphasize the federal dimension, I think for good reasons, practical reasons, as well as theoretical reasons, allows for pluralism. There's also a German scholar by the name of Ottfried Höfer who has written on legitimacy and legality in the times of globalization. The book is now already 22 years old. But he also has described that there are two different types of federalism. One type of federalism could be bottom-up, and another type of federalism could be top-down. So bottom-up or top-down. And I think the Indian constitution provides with a great example of a bottom-down movement for linguistic states, which is actually already starting, I would say, certainly in the 1920s, if not earlier. And it's also a specific promise during the independence movement that the constitution would guarantee linguistic states. After partition, then, there's a little bit of backpedaling on this. And but then you have the movement in Andhra by Patishley Ramulu and his fast unto death for the cause of a linguistic state. Now, of course, you all know that things are much more complicated. It's not just for the language. There were also other social, class-based, caste-based disputes behind this agitation. But the point is that he is successful, right? He reestablishes the principle that the Another way of conceptualizing this federal dimension of how we can imagine how world constitutionalism evolves is maybe the example of the death penalty. It doesn't again evolve as a clear top-down command, but grows within specific countries. And there's also this idea that we have regional associations like the African Union, or of course the European Union, yeah, or the Inter-American Human Rights Court. So when you think about the death penalty, here you can see the countries which have abolished the death penalty, whether they are at war or not. Then the countries with the lighter green, it could be the death penalty during time of war could still, capital punishment could be reintroduced. And then you still have a large number of countries that have the death penalty. But I just wanted to point out how regional legal institutions, like the European Convention for Human Rights, have pushed the abolition of the death penalty really to the foreground. You can see this particularly clearly for Europe and for Latin America, but you can also see it emerging in the African Union. So there's a new judgment by the African Human Rights Court from 2019 against the death penalty, but you can also see a lot of constitutional amendments in various African countries to abolish the death penalty. They don't just go the path of asking a Supreme Court or Constitutional Court to abolish it. They are actually having a constitutional political debate about abolishing the death penalty. So take the example of Germany. The last person to be executed in Germany was in 18th of February, 1949. That's for West Germany. And then the German Basic Law came into force a few weeks later. And there was a woman on death row at the same time, but she then was saved by the passage of the German Basic Law, which today still is our constitution, and which abolishes the death penalty in Article 102. In those days, this was quite a difficult debate within Germany. It was a razor-sharp vote. It could have also gone the other way. But then, because of Germany's integration into the European Convention of Human Rights and into the EU, it was the regional legal developments that have led to the abolition of the death penalty for the whole continent of Europe. I think you can see similar developments of how constitutional change from below can grow around the world. Here you have the issue of LGBT plus rights. Yeah, so this is sort of a map by one of the many NGOs that studies this systematically. And the first thing, of course, they look for is the criminalization of sexual orientation. And then they would look for things like same-sex marriage. This has been picked up in Ireland, a country, that 20, 30 years ago, one would have thought about maybe as a conservative Catholic country, the Republic of Ireland. But they have voted for this. And I think the interesting thing that I wanted to point out here is their citizens' assembly that sort of has prepared the ground for these constitutional amendments. Yeah, so these are also new innovations, new institutional innovations, which I think are not yet reflected in the current, sort of in the older movement for a world constitution. It sometimes seems a little bit outdated by ignoring more participatory institutional designs that have become quite commonplace in many countries, right? So these citizen assemblies would be just one example. I also think when I look at a lot of the materials for the World Constitution, that it's quite English-centric in terms of the language that is used on these websites. And this just struck me because a few days ago, I saw I heard a TED talk on climate change and the climate crisis, and that most of the literature on climate change is in English. And there's now a social movement from a lot of young people which translate climate science into all sorts of different languages, right? So that was also one of the other reasons why I gave this Indian example of multilingual constitutional design. I think this is something that might be missing there at the moment. So tons of constitutional change, vibrant constitutional politics in many countries. I don't see so much from a comparative perspective of that vibrancy in constitutional politics and in ambitious constitutional amendments. When I look at India, India, of course, had this enormous success story of the basic structure, which during the emergency time, during the 70s, was enormously important for constitutional governance in India. But it may even be that the idea of a basic structure and this constant emphasis on unamendability could turn into weakness in the long run, right? I think there's a lot of need for constitutional change to update a constitutional text that is 70 years old, whether it's the German constitution or the Brazilian constitution or the Indian constitution. It's not country specific. It's just a reality that constitutions that are very old also will need significant, far-reaching constitutional amendments. Okay, so we've seen new aspirational dimensions with the idea of world constitutionalism. We have certainly seen trends. Yeah, I mean, these are not linear trends. It's not that these trends don't have periods of backlash or are under attack, right? A lot of people nowadays are asking themselves whether we are again in a time period like the 1930s, how many constitutions will survive? Yeah, so we sort of see waves of constitutional governments coming and going. But nevertheless, I hope that the examples that I've shown you have drawn your attention to the areas of global constitutionalism, which I think are particularly important. The last thing I wanted to talk about is climate change and how it's going to affect the development of constitutions. You might have heard that in Germany, we had a very important decision by the Constitutional Court, which has asked the government to become more ambitious with respect to climate change, right? So it was meant that the goal was to be CO2 neutral by 2050. And the court has said, no, you have to work towards being CO2 neutral by 2045. And what's interesting is just the reasoning of the court to think about future generations and to think about the right to, or the possibility to emit CO2 also from the perspective of the younger generations to come, right? So I think that is a new dimension for constitutional law, because the German constitution essentially protects the way that we run our economy, right? I mean, that's what it's built around. It protects property rights, it protects industry, it protects collective bargaining, it protects the way our economy functions. And so climate change is not a question of polluting a river or having higher standards when we use insecticides or pesticides or something. Climate change really is a fundamental challenge in which we say that what the Constitution has declared as normal and as functional is now suddenly seen as something that undermines our capacity to live a good life, right? And the Extinction Rebellion movement in the UK has written a very powerful pamphlet where they say that this shift that climate change brings about in terms of the severity of the impact that we can measure by normal human economic activity essentially is the end of the social contract, right? So we cannot say that our political economy can go on as normal, because in the long run, it would undermine the very foundations on which the social contract is based. Yeah, so how does one solve this problem? It's of course highly problematic that young people are not allowed to vote. So that also might need updating when you look at the current drafts of a world constitution is the age, the voting age. In Germany, that's now going to come down for 16. Scholars like David Runciman say that, he proposes that the moment you can read and write, you should be allowed to vote. But again, there are these ideas of citizen assemblies, or that you create a parliament on the basis of a lottery, for instance. So there's this idea of sortition, which you can see here as part of the slide. That goes back to ancient Greece, essentially, where a lot of public functionaries were not elected, but were selected on a lottery basis. Yeah, so in Germany, we now had this, just to give you one example, you make a long list of people, you take into account a certain diversity, right? So you don't want to have only old people or only young people. You have a little bit of gender diversity, people with a migration background, and all sorts of things. And then you have a lottery, and the lottery then selects the citizen assembly. And I think this is a very interesting model for thinking about new forms of representation. And so there has been a lot going on in national constitutions in that respect, which I hope will flow into the thinking about the world constitution. This is the quote I'm going to leave you with. Yeah, I teach in Delhi. Most Indians are under 30. Most of them actually are under 20, many under 30. I think, when you think about the Indian constitution, at some point of time, you will have to be as bold as the people, the Indians were in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and risk a little bit more to try new things. And don't be scared of mistakes. If anything goes wrong, you can always pass the next constitutional amendment and change things for the better. So with that conclusion, I'll end my presentation and look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was really interesting and educational and thought-provoking as to how we can get a solution to problems that each of us face. Does anyone have any questions for sir? All right, then, we'll move ahead. I would now like to invite Professor Nusrat Sheikh to read out the report for the conference proceedings over the last 3 days.
Thank you, Ketayu. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Myself, Assistant Professor Shaikh Nusrat Afroz, Government Law College, and the convener of the 3 days international conference. I would like to begin with a quote. I quote, "There can be no peace without development, no development without peace, and no lasting peace or sustainable development without respect for human rights and the rule of law." I unquote former UN Deputy Secretary General Jan Eliasson. Honorable Chief Guest for our valedictory function of this conference, Professor Dr. Alexander Christoph, and the President of the valedictory function, Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, Principal, Government Law College, Mumbai, all the eminent keynote speakers of all the sessions, and the distinguished chairperson of all the sessions, academicians, advocates, faculty members, and dear student. I'm very glad and delighted to be a part of this 3-day international conference when you had everyone who is knowledgeable on the subject sharing of his or her thoughts with you. When there is all sorts of explanations whether to have a world constitution or not, I would say, who better than academicians and legal scholars and the students can discuss about the framing of the world constitution, its needs, problems, and challenges in enforcement and functioning. As GLC is committed to humanitarian ethos, has decided to host this international conference on the world constitution a new horizon of human rights, wherein we have received quality research papers, which has been presented by the eminent speakers who have made in-depth and very pertinent observations and shared their research findings with us. And the interaction which has taken place over the 3 days will definitely help us in understanding and taking a one step forward towards the framing of World Constitution. So coming to the paper which we have received, around 31 papers from all over the globe and 250 plus participations were there. The international conference was divided into 5 technical sessions in 3 days. Now coming to the first technical session, the sub-theme for the session was Idea and Need of World Constitution, which was held on 7th January 2022. So the keynote address, which was delivered by Professor Dr. Glenn Martin, President of World Constitution and Parliament Association, has enlightened the participants with the overall historical background and the need for having the World Constitution. Our Honorable Principal and the Organizing Secretary of the International Conference, Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, chaired the first session, in which 4 research scholars have presented their research papers. Dr. Martin began his note by emphasizing the significance of human being united and not thinking as individual, but rather as a species of mankind, since we are all bound to one another, the I of individuality and we of humanity are inseparable. He went on to discuss the functioning of law in society. The broadest functions of law is to protect human rights, freedom, liberty, and integrity for common good. Law largely reflects moral dimensions in various forms and features. Therefore, human rights themselves are recognizable moral principles. Dr. Martin discussed the duty to respect the rights of one another and the realization of oneness that stems from it. Conclusively, Dr. Martin reiterated that the constituent power to make laws and protect rights come from universal humanity. Authentic citizenship must be global. The power should be vested into a world authority under a world constitution. Sovereignty must be global and then delegated to national and local authorities. A world constitution would help prioritize the we and help recognize the sovereignty of the people, which will in turn aid in protecting universal rights. Among the paper presenters, Mr. Anand Kamble, his topic was the concept of welfare state and world constitution. Mr. Kamble compared the concept of welfare state with that of the world constitution. He emphasized the creation of a constitution that embodies human welfare and create ideal circumstances to create a welfare planet. In turn, Mr. Kamble went on to discuss various direct principles in the Earth Constitution under Article 13, such as provision of adequate employment, public health, equal opportunities. Coming to the next presenter, his topic was a dream of world constitution and reality. Dr. Kapil Chopagare, he began his presentation by discussing the significance of a constitution for every state, as it forms the organs that functions on behalf of the state and defines the power, structure, and the role of these organs. He went on to discuss the state theory and how modern state differs largely from traditional ones, as they do not follow monarchy, but rather follow the will of the people. Coming to the next presentation, the third presentation by Dr. Monica, her topic was a realization of welfare state, role of world constitution in present era. Dr. Monica focused on why a welfare state is required in today's era as we are living in a modern globalized world, human rights are celebrated every day, and United Nations, along with non-state actors, are also working very hard these days for the cause. So all the countries, whether underdeveloped, developing, or developed, are working for the sole object here, that is human rights, and mankind, and making domestic laws to celebrate and protection of human rights. The next presenter in the same session, the topic was Concept of Welfare State and World Constitution, which was presented by Mr. Vinod Patil. This presentation was conducted in absentia, and the article compared the Earth Constitution and enlightened on the concept of a welfare state. The article also focused on the topic of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The whole world is a family. The article discussed how the World Constitution, though a need of the hour, is a utopian concept and could not be fulfilled considering practical scenarios. Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, the chairperson of the session, in conclusion, expressed how it's written in Upanishads that each and every one is relative to each other and the entire world is a family. Hence, since each family has a list of rules and regulations, similarly, the world should have a code to be followed in the form of World Constitution. India's philosophy of the world is one big family is closely aligned to the idea of World Constitution. The spirit of coexistence is strong to overcome differences and barriers. The idea of World Constitution may sound impractical in today's time, but it is a concept that has inspired India for thousands of years. The life principles such as honesty, truthfulness, selflessness, non-violence, imbibing oneness, respect, and coordination with other living beings have to be inculcated into the world constitution to make it a living constitution. So anchor for this session was Ms. Anushka Mani, moderator Ms. Umehani Ronak, Mr. Vinit Raje for this first session, and the rapporteur Harshi Baldota. Now coming to the technical session 2, the day 2, theme World Constitution and Challenges Ahead, which was scheduled on January 8, 2022. Dr. Ben Sinaya was the resource person for the session 2. He briefly introduced and explained the theme of the sessions about the challenges ahead in framing, implementing, and enforcing the World Constitution. Dr. Sinaya started his address by providing 4 important subheads regarding challenges to the World Constitution, conceptual problem regarding World Constitution, issues of problematic trends prevailing in a different part of the world, implementation and enforcement of World Constitution, discrepancies in the defining the rights of the people, including political rights, social rights, economic rights, etc. So at the outset, he disagreed with Han Kelsen's theory that law should be separated from politics. He instead propounded that the World Constitution, as a matter of legal deliberation, is a political discussion wherein different states, organizations, commissions need to come together to frame a universal world constitution. In the technical session 2, we had 4 paper presentation. That is Ms. Samruddhi Mahadgot, Dr. Madhura Kalamkar, Professor Dr. Muhammad Sahib Hussain, and Dr. Sajid Patel. So the first presenter, his topic was problems and challenges on enforcement of World Constitution. Ms. Mahadgot opened with an explanation of the first 2 world wars and had ravaged the world's manpower and how it led to the formation of 2 major blocs in the world that led to the Cold War, which almost caused the Third World War. She continued by speaking about the ongoing caste-based, sex-based, religion-based discriminations. She continued by stating that UN has formed to maintain international peace and security, and that it has various organizations working hard to protect the fundamental rights that allow us to live as human beings. Coming to the next presenter, his topic was Constitutional Law, Current Trends and Challenges. Dr. Madhura Kalamkar, she introduced us to the topic by expressing the fact that society must be formed on the principle of equality and the law needs to be tightened for the protection of its citizens. The government has amended the constitution for the protection and development of women and children, and despite some abuses of authority by the enforcement authorities, the Constitution of India still endures. Coming to the next presentation in the technical session second, Professor Muhammad Sahib Hussain, Professor of Law, Kampala International University School of Law, Uganda. His topic was Challenges in the Enforcement of the World Constitution. Professor Hussain began his presentation by tracing the origin of the World Constitution. He introduced the principle of Vasudeva Kutumbakam mentioned in the Manu Upanishad, which means that the world is one big family. Therefore, he wished to start and end his presentation from we the people, after explaining the background of how the concept of itself came to be and what the ideological explanation of the concept is. He went on to explain the problems and challenges in its enforcement. He went into the biggest problems of the enforcement, such as the diversity of cultures, faith, religion, and individual rights, making the drafting difficult because no draft can cater to all of them to protect everyone. Those problems, coupled with the problems of unawareness and illiteracy in many countries, would make it difficult to educate people about the World Constitution. The next presenter, that is Dr. Sajid Patel, he stated his topic was World Constitution as a replica of the Indian Constitution. So he stated in his presentation by elucidating the fact that a world constitution is possible if it's made in the same spirit of the UN Charter. If that is done, then the constitution will have its advantages and disadvantages, but there won't be a solution for some of the problems, such as protection of human rights, regarding their enforcement and protection. He then recommended that the World Constitution can use the Indian Constitution as a framework document, as the Indian Constitution is a masterpiece and also the longest and the most extensive constitution in the world. The chairperson of this session, Mrs. Ushashi Guha, she summarized some important points highlighted by the previous speakers and paper presenters. Being a great proponent of the World Constitution herself, she emphasized one of the basic needs for a World Constitution: to refrain from war and atrocities. She also contended that the human rights of the people should be universally accepted. She also emphasized Rabindranath Tagore's concept of universal humanism, that is Manushya Dharma, and related it with World Constitution. In conclusion, she iterated that the Constitution and culture have to live long together. So the World Constitution needs to bind people from all over the world. Rapporteur for this technical session 2 was Mr. Alpesh Sharma and Mr. Anshul Karkera. The sub-theme for this session was World Constitution and Human Rights. The session focused on the idea of World Constitution and its viability in the global paradigm. Its aim was mainly to give some clarity on the concept of World Constitution, the various factors involved in exploring its enforceability and implementation, and further, the challenges involved in such a scenario. The resource person of the conference was Shri Kravati Srinivas Rao. He works at Kavati Law Firm. The chairperson of the conference was Professor Hemlata Talesra. She is presently working as a director in Srimati KB Dave College of Education. Mr. Kaviti Srinivas Rao started his note by talking about how the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by United Nations was one of the first attempts to protect the human rights at an international level. He emphasized how there are numerous challenges such as different governments, religions, cultures, languages that exist in order to create a world constitution. The sovereignty of countries would also be a major hurdle. Mr. Kaviti put forth an example of the pandemic bringing the world together, which can be considered as a ray of hope for making a world constitution. Having a world constitution would lead to peace, harmony, and establishment of a uniform judicial system. It would also lead to an economic uniformity to a certain extent, helping the underdeveloped nations to be in a better position. The aftermath of Second World War led to the creation of United Nations that consist of the International Court of Justice. Mr. Kaviti talked about how this can be a small step in the creation of world constitution along with the uniform judicial system. Coming to the paper presenters, Mr. Nilesh, the presenters for that technical session 3 was Mr. Nilesh Vittal Rao Dhande, Dr. Deepika Kaushik, Ms. Archana Agar, and Ms. Dipanya Walanj. Mr. Nilesh Dhande, his topic for presentation was role of constitution and human rights for the protection and promotion of indigenous people in respect of their intellectual property rights. He talked about how having a world constitution based on human rights would help in protecting the intellectual property rights of indigenous communities. He discussed that in today's commercialized world, people try to take undue advantage of intellectual work created by the indigenous community. The current regime of IPR, protection of indigenous community, has not fared any satisfactory result yet. Coming to the second presentation of the technical session, Dr. Deepa Kaushik, her topic was World Constitution and Future of Human Rights. Dr. Deepa began her presentation by talking about various challenges such as the pandemic, terrorism, militarism, abuse of human rights, and the world is facing in today's time. The nations dealing with various economic, socio-political issues affects the right and freedom of the people. To safeguard them, a world constitution can prove to be a viable solution. She mentioned the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as being an important step in protecting human rights at an international level. Coming to the next presenter, that is Mrs. Archana Agar. Her topic for presentation was Refugee Human Right Protection under the World Constitution. The key objectives of Ms. Agar's paper was to study the application of refugees' human rights under the World Constitution and to analyze the role of the World Constitution in protecting the human rights of the refugees. The presentation revolved around the notion that refugees' rights are not delivered as a human rights worldwide. Coming to the fourth presentation, Ms. Dipanya Walanj, her topic was Universal Declaration of Human Rights as the World Constitution. Ms. Walanj began her presentation by focusing on how World Constitution changes the status quo of nation states. The main argument of Ms. Walanj's presentation was whether Universal Declaration of Human Rights can be used as a world constitution. Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which protects human dignity, equality, and liberty respectively, should be included in the World Constitution. Further, it was highlighted that there are other articles in Universal Declaration of Human Rights which are difficult to execute because of difficulty in interpretation. The chairperson of the session, Professor Hemlata Talesara, director at Srimati KB Dave College of Education, Pilwai, Maharashtra. Professor Talesara, in conclusion, highlighted how the World Constitution should serve as a Bill of Rights, which strive to protect human rights and individuality of its citizen, Success of the World Constitution will be dependent on the participation of all nations. The World Constitution will face challenges from the ones who are powerful, and hence it is important that all the nations rise up to take this opportunity. The main human rights which the World Constitution must include are freedom of speech, religion, and association. World Constitution will truly usher in a new era of peace and prosperity if human rights and dignity are upheld. World Constitution should also stress upon sustainable development. The pursuits of protecting human rights will eventually reap fruits only when the society is educated about its human rights and responsibilities. The anchor for the session was Ms. Mansi Dharke, moderator Ms. Kartiki Duse, and the rapporteur Devdutt Menon. Coming to the technical session 4, the theme for this technical session 4 was World Constitution, the culmination point of philosophies and ideologies. So the session focused on the idea of World Constitution and its viability in the global paradigm. Its aim was mainly to give some clarity on the concept of World Constitution, the various factors involved in exploring its enforceability and implementation, and further, the challenges involved in such a scenario. The modern world has to pay a heavy price in the form of 2 world wars that mankind witnessed due to the incapability and the inefficiency of existing mechanisms. The need to conquer imperialism, colonialism, arms race, and various other factors caused unimaginable damage to the ideals of global unity and peace. Dr. Amal Sethi, a senior fellow at the University of Hamburg, Germany, and the alumni of Government Law College, Mumbai, the resource person for our session 4, and the chairperson, Dr. Eugenia Allman, executive secretary of the Provisional World Parliament. The paper presenters, Mr. Muhammad Yusuf Hayat and Dr. K. Sita Manikayam, Mrs. Sanavi Deshmukh, and Professor Muhammad Sahib Hussain and his student, Bernard Ottino. Dr. Amal Sethi, believing the concept of World Constitution, he influenced both domestic law and the international law. Referring to the Global Constitutionalism Journal, he raised a question of what is the role of the Constitution. And he also answering it with the definition of American scholar Mark Tushnet. According to him, Constitution has 2 major functions. In one, that Constitution is a statement which symbolizes fundamental or core objectives of the state and its highest aspiration, its national identity, highest values, and secondly, about the organization of the government and sharing governmental powers. He discussed the political system of the United Nations, which is failing or proving to be inefficient in addressing the human rights concerns, macro problems like Syrian war, Afghanistan war, etc. Current system and structures are not well developed to tackle the global risk which will be faced in future, like biorisk, climate change, advanced technologies, existential risk. Coming to the paper presentation of this technical session, Mr. Muhammad Yusuf Hayat and Dr. K. Sita Manikayam, his topic for the presentation was a jurisprudential analysis of fundamental rights and directive principle vis-a-vis global world constitution. Mr. Muhammad Yusuf Hayat presentation was based upon jurisprudential analysis of the fundamental rights and the directive principles with a comparative assessment of the global world constitution. He emphasized the creation of a constitution that embodies human welfare and creates ideal, equal circumstances for the human race, remove economic inequalities, and provide a decent standard of living to working people. He discussed incident of Greta Thunberg, who emphasized global sustainable development rights for all the global citizens, and George Floyd's related with the Black Lives Matter. Coming to the next presenter, Ms. Sanvi Deshmukh. Topic: Impact of International Covenants on Globalization, a Step Towards the World Constitution. So she started with the definition of the Constitution, which means to come together and form an organization, which can also be called as a rule book of the organization or country. She discussed features of the Indian Constitution, the theory of the supremacy of law, and the Constitution became the spirit of law in India. Coming to the third presentation by Professor Dr. Mohammad Sahib Hussain and Bernard Oteo, his topic was World Constitution and Sustainability of Individual Rights and State Sovereignty. Professor Hussain begins his presentation by highlighting how the World Constitution, like any other international instruments, suffers from the lack of enforceability at the incredibly complex international level and the counter struggle of nations to maintain their constitutional sovereignties. Under such a constitution, he briefly defined and discussed the World Constitution and its history and significance in comparison to national constitutions, emphasizing the necessary role of World Constitution would play in harmonizing all the nations and their sovereign powers. He further identified and discussed the crucial areas of legislation a world constitution would impact, including common individual rights, religion, privacy, speech and expression, and personal property. Dr. Eugenia Allman, Executive Secretary of the Provisional World Parliament, the chairperson of the session, in her concluding address, shared with us some valuable insights into how a modern world constitution called the Earth Constitution, drafted between 1968 and 1991 across 4 constituent assemblies by 25-member teams, had derived a considerable amount of inspiration from the constitutions of the nation in South Asian subcontinents, and the contributions of Mumbai-based Professor D.M. Spencer in the drafting of the Earth Constitution. Speaking about the 15th session of the Provisional World Parliament, she discussed the adoption of World District Standards legislation and how the structure of such legislation would translate into the Konkan region of Maharashtra, India. For this session, the rapporteur, Mr. Aryan Pandey and Mr. Ashutosh Wani. Now coming to today's technical session 5, World Constitution and other related issues. The resource person of 5th technical session, Professor P.N. Murthy, Vice President, World Constitution Parliament Association. The paper, Sir has emphasized that India, being one of the ancient but living civilization of this world, has made immense contributions. He pointed out that global governance and world constitution in India has already contributed enough in the past, but we need to do more in future. Sir explained that World Union was founded in India in Pondicherry, and World Constitution Parliament Association in USA, founders of both were from the same ideology of Sir Aurobindo. He spoke about the final dream was a step in evolution which would raise man to a higher and larger consciousness and begin the solution of problems which have perplexed and vexed him since he first began to think and to dream of individual perfection and a perfect society. Sir highlighted on we talk of independence, we talk of sovereign rights. I am one of those that I believe in sovereign rights, but I believe the world has come to a stage when the emphasis is not to be so much on independence as on interdependence. The paper presenter for the technical session 5, Dr. Nagesh Sawant and Professor Damodar Hake, Dr. Amitabh Sampatrao Gaude, Ms. Shivani Pandey, and the chairperson, Dr. Mohammad Sahib Hussain, has commented as follows when it comes to the presentation of Dr. Nagesh Sawant and Professor Damodar M. Hake. The topic was Problem and Challenges in Implementation of World Constitution and Overview. The presenter had discussed the future problems and challenges which could be faced when it comes to the implementation of World Constitution, the risk in dealing with national and other issues related to sovereign state, the national and local problems and its effect on its society and people. The next presenter, that is Dr. Amitabh Sampatrao Gaude, in his topic, the role of civilized states in the implementation of World Constitution in the light of protection of human rights under the democratic and non-democratic system, he had explained the role of civilized state in 21st century, what are the mandatory duties of every state towards its citizens, and to implement policies related to development of the people. What is the need of the World Constitution and the goals to achieve? He explained the protection of human rights under the democratic system, the challenges in the implementation of the World Constitution, adaptation of unique mechanism of human rights protection across the globe. Coming to the third presentation of technical session 5, Ms. Shivani Pandey. Her topic for presentation was Future of World Government in the Age of Nationalism. In her presentation, she stated that world government is the creation of a single political authority for all mankind. The first semblance of such a world government was seen in the League of Nations, formed after the World War I, but the failure of League of Nations, followed by the World War II, led to the creation of larger organization with more areas of operation in almost every country as its party, the United Nations. Coming to the fourth presenter, Ms. Siddhikala Utpal Bhavsar. This research paper was based on the theme, the philosophy of universalization of mankind under the umbrella of World Constitution, with special reference to universalization of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer and intersex persons. She spoke about the role of UN in not having played any role in the protection of the LGBTQ rights. I would like to quote here, let us remember, one book, one pen, one child, and one teacher can change the world. I unquote by Malala Yousafzai. With this, I feel that our conference will be a fruitful. With this, I feel that our conference will be fruitful even if we ignite one mind, one generation to work upon the idea of having a world constitution and bringing it into reality for achieving a common cause of global peace, sustainable development, for protection of human rights, for dealing with the issues like terrorism, cross-border trafficking, drug trafficking, climate change, global warming, etc. in the current scenario, if I would say pandemic. So likewise, I would like to express gratitude to Professor Dr. Glenn Martin, the chief guest of our inaugural function. This conference could not be successful without the support and guidance of Professor Daswani sir, Professor P.N. Murthy, and Dr. Muhammad Sahib Hussain for their constant support. With this note that a new hope and expectations to be able to be fulfilled and achieved by the World Constitution by keeping and maintaining the human rights and human values at its center point, I humbly thank the organizing committee and the organizing secretary, Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, the Principal Government Law College, Mumbai, for giving me this opportunity to present the summary of the marathon 3 days international conference on World Constitution, a new horizon of human rights. And congratulate all of you for making it happen, first for making it happen and making it a grand success. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day and a memorable day ahead and listening it patiently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think all our participants, even if they missed a session, now they've understood how the sessions progressed. So that was really, really nice. Thank you so much. I would now like to ask our participants if any of them would like to share their experience of the conference over the last 3 days or any feedback for us so that we can incorporate it over our next sessions as well. We had asked this question previously and we have 3 volunteers as of now. Professor Yusuf Hayat, would you like to go ahead?
Sir, kindly unmute.
Yes. Thank you, Kritika ma'am. And firstly, I would like to extend my heartfelt congratulations to the organizing team. I still remember the conversation with Kritika ma'am. Okay, how fruitfully they have provided me this wonderful opportunity. Of course, in fact, I teach constitutional law, and this, when I discovered, when my university floated this event, I was at the last moment, and I could able to reach you guys, and you have provided me an ease and access. But most importantly, the takeaway which I'm going to share here in a nutshell, having witnessed Glenn Martin's his speech, and also Eugenia's, because technical session 4, Eugenia has provided his what we call points. And today, I'm most fortunate to have witnessed Professor Alexander Fischer's his thought-provoking, wonderful presentation. Okay, comparative analysis, and of course, this platform shows, somewhere down the line, yes, a day will come. We have to wait and see. Definitely, a day will come with all the common fraternity, the common goals which we share. Sitting across globally and witnessing this wonderful international conference. I truly appreciate that you are conducting this wonderful event in this auspicious month. And let me remind, this auspicious month is that is the January 26th, the Republic Day. Soon we are going to celebrate the Republic Day, which the government of India has also Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. That is the crux. Definitely, I really thanks the organizers, Professor Nusrat Sheikh Afroz ma'am, Professor Kritika ma'am, of course, Professor Asmita ma'am, the main ship, the captain of the ship, Professor Asmita ma'am, for giving this wonderful opportunity. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir. I would now like to request Professor Muhammad Sahib Hussain to go ahead.
Yes, very much here, madam, and thanks a lot for giving this. Everybody say opportunity. I don't say the opportunity, I say the shot, or a gap, or a slat. SLOT is slat. And I'm continuously watching each and every session of yours to observe what are the lacunas are there, what are the gaps are there, how it will be done. So what I want to say is everything, because I didn't have any idea about the world constitution. But when after hearing it, then I found that there is a book also that the word constitution is there. So having 31 teaching experience of me, both India and African continent, because half of the life is I spent in the African continent only. So I felt it very much happy, because my theory is, my slogan, I did not share with you. My slogan is, in Telugu, you will say, Anni Danamula Kanna, Vidya Danam Minna. I repeat, Anni Danamula Kanna, Vidya Danam Minna. In English, my slogan is, in all arms, education arm is at zenith. That is the slogan with the spirit. I am making these voluntary classes for the people. Once I will be back to the agenda, I don't know whether I can have this time to do it or not. But still, once you have to, where there is a will, there is a way.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks a lot.
I would now like to ask Dr. Amitav Gavle, sir. Sir, you're on mute. Sir, I would also request you to please keep it up to 2.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. On the outset, I just want to thank the Honorable Secretary, Organizing Secretary, and the Principal, Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, for arranging such a wonderful international conference, that too extending to 3 days. I'm very thankful to her because I was able to listen live Dr. Glenn Martin, one of the very famous and renowned philosopher, teacher, who has a great work on the very topic of world constitution. And I hope that GLC is one of the leading institution. Yes, till yesterday it was leading institution in Asia, and now I could say that it is it is going to be the leading institution on the global platform soon, with the able guidance of Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, ma'am. And my wish is that, ma'am, you should have such kinds of international conference every year, so that all the people from academics as well as from practicing should have opportunity to present their ideas and opinion. With this, I conclude. Thank you very much, and best wishes for your coming endurance. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Professor Hemlata, ma'am, you've also been raising your hand for a while.
Yeah, thanks. The 3 days webinar was great success. It's well planned, well managed. And also one thing is very good, time management. All sessions were started in time and ended on time. And the speakers were very experienced. And I am also associated with WCPA. And Dr. Martin is the working and written so many books on World Constitution and Parliament Association. And also he is the chief executive of Earth Constitution Institute, USA. So he is doing a great work. And the inaugural session, keynote speaker and chief guest was Dr. Martin. It was very good. And the other speakers was very nice, very fruitful, delivered their lectures. And I congratulate the Dr. Asmita Madam and the conveners for this successful and nice webinar. And there is a need to follow programs also. It should be. So thank you very much for giving me a time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And lastly, we'll be taking Professor Ben Sihania.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you're on.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been an excellent conference. And my 3 points, brief points are these. Number one, it has given us an opportunity to reflect on sub-national, national, regional, and global governance issues. Secondly, it has reminded us of the possibilities of strengthening our international, global, earth, world, and related constitutional and or charter or governance systems. And that is a very, very important thing, because I think since the end of the Cold War, since the end of the Cold War in the late 1880s, I think there has been a lot of people going back to their sub-national units much more, and that the emerging global system has not been very fair. So that's a really, and lastly for me, then let us, as was indicated, let us share the presentations as they are, and then probably work on redrafting them in light of what we have learned, and then a revised publication or documentation could be done. But as of now, it would be good also to share whatever is available, and then they are probably revised and reviewed and then shared again. I really thank everybody, all the participants, speaking from Kenya, Africa, from the academy. This has also been a very important interdisciplinary conference. While the main entry point is law and governance, it has been a very important interdisciplinary conference, reminding us of the local, the regional, and the global. And as we always say in economy, in law, and in governance and environment, we can think globally, but also at the same time act. I would say act globally and act locally. Let's go and do it. Thank you.
Thank
Blessings.
you so much, sir. We will also be sharing feedback forms with all the participants, and I would urge all of you to please fill it and give us critique so that we understand where we can improve for the next time as well. I would now like to move ahead and introduce our Honorable Principal and President for today's session and for the conference, Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, an academician, an educator, a social activist, and an able administrator, whose vast experience in the field of academia and social service has placed her at the front lines of various social issues, effecting reforms and empowering people. Dr. Vaidya is also the recipient of several awards, such as the Tejaswini Award, the Nation Builder Award, and the Superwoman 2020 Award. She has served as the head of Department of Law at the NMD College of Arts, Commerce, Law and Management at Gondia, and has also acted as the principal of Gokhale Education Society's NB Thakur Law College at Nashik, before finally taking up responsibility as the principal of Government Law College, Mumbai. As an accomplished leader, Dr. Vaidya has won over the hearts of all students at JLC with her enthusiasm and efforts to introduce a variety of new programs and courses. Ma'am, I kindly request you to begin the lecture and address us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ketayun. Ma Saraswati Lavandan. All the distinguished dignitaries present here, Professor Dr. Glenn Martin, Dr. Bain Sihaya, Dr. Ushashi Guha Madam, Shri Kaveti Srinivas Rao, Professor Dr. Hemlata Talesara Madam, Dr. Amal Sethi Sir, Dr. Irgania Alvand, Professor P.N. Murthy Sir, Shri Muhammad Sahib Hussain Sir, and the chief guest of today's valedictory function, Professor Alexander Christoph Fischer Sir. All the delegates from different parts of law, all the delegates from different corners of Bharat, honorable High Court judges who are present here, academicians, researchers, lawyers, teachers, my dear colleague, convener, co-convener, and all teaching and non-teaching staff of JLC, and most importantly, my beloved students, volunteers. Very good afternoon to one and all. We are now at the verge of ending this international conference on World Constitution, a new horizon of human rights. And I must say, and we all agree that we are at the beginning of new start with new vision, new insight, maturity, and understanding of the concept World Constitution. Many aspects were touched during this conference through the ideas of researchers, like the concept of welfare state and World Constitution, a dream of World Constitution and reality, the role of World Constitution, need an idea of World Constitution, and so on. We go for this Constitution. If we go for the World Constitution, then what are the challenges to implement it? In implementing it, how the World Constitution be, whether it can be a replica of Indian Constitution or can be different, and how to enforce it, and most importantly, who will implement it? Can the education be means to implement it? These queries were also discussed and solutions were searched in second technical session, World Constitution and Challenges Ahead. In the third technical session, World Constitution and Human Rights, it was discussed whether UDHR can be the base for World Constitution and human rights be treated as fundamental right in this Constitution. The jurisprudential analysis of fundamental right and directive principles vis-a-vis global World Constitution was discussed, along with the position of international covenant, concept of sustainability of individual rights and state sovereignty, world democracy, world family, and other philosophies and ideologies attached to World Constitution. In technical session 4, it were discussed. In today's morning session, many important aspects such as problem and challenges in implementation of World Constitution, the role of civilized state in implementing World Constitution, the future of world government in the age of nationalization and philosophy of universalization of mankind under the umbrella of World Constitution were discussed. Dr. P.N. Murthy, sir, very aptly stated and showed the way ahead by pointing out that India has been a front runner in visualizing a world federation. So initiative must be taken by Bharat for consensus, draft, implementation, and to build the world as a family, abide by the said World Constitution. I appreciate from bottom of my heart all the delegates, paper presenters, and express gratitude towards the resource person, the keynote speakers, and the chairman of each technical session for their cooperation and fruitful contribution in this international conference. The bond created because of this interaction will be continued from today, I believe and I assure. At this point of valedictory function, I put the resolution for consideration. I quote that India being one of the largest democracy in the world, India shall play an important role in implementation of World Constitution, that we shall aware the citizens about the World Constitution by various academic means, that World Constitution have a greater role to play in human rights protection. Therefore, there is a need to have an international approach towards it, that Indian philosophy has it in the roots, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, meaning entire world is one family, and we should achieve it through this one step forward in the form of World Constitution, to work for it in the democratic capacities. And the fifth resolution, that to imbibe life values and life skills through education, which will give us the way to implement World Constitution and for peaceful human existence. Let us put hand in hand for peaceful coexistence on the Mother Earth. So with the consent of all the dignitaries who are present here, let us pass this resolution. Do you agree? Thank you very much. So with these words, I conclude. Thank you all. Thank you for participation.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Before ending, I would now like to request our co-convener, Professor Kritika Tembhurnikar ma'am, to please give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Kitayun. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. A very warm greeting of the day to all who are present here in this valedictory function of this 3 days international conference on World Constitution, a new horizon of human rights. I, Ms. Kritika Tembhurnikar, co-convener of this conference and assistant professor, government was the chief guest of the valedictory function, Professor Dr. Alexander Fischer, Professor and Executive Director, Center on Public Law and Jurisprudence, Jindal Global Law School, for accepting our invitation and for gracing this occasion with his scholarly engagement and for such a splendidly brilliant and enlightening address and presentation. Thank you very much, your good sir. It was such an intellectual feast for all of us to hear you. Thank you, sir. I now extend my sincere gratitude towards the chief guest of inaugural ceremony, Dr. Glenn Martin, for his opening address, which unlocked this stream of erudite thoughts for 3 days. I also extend my thanks to all the keynote speakers and chairpersons of all the technical sessions who helped from all over the world, Dr. Bain Sihania, Advocate Kaviti Srinivasa Rao, Dr. Amal Sethi, Professor P.N. Murthy, Dr. Ushoshi Guha, Dr. Hemlata Talisra, Dr. Eugenia Amund, and Professor Dr. Mohammad Sahib Hussain for their active engagements in all the technical sessions. We feel immensely honored to have you all with us. Thank you very much. I now extend my thanks to all the paper presenters in all the technical sessions. Their thorough research was reflected from their presentations. The recommendations given by these scholars will definitely help in bringing a wholesome, inclusive draft of World Constitution someday very soon. I thank you all for your contribution to this conference. Now I extend my thanks to all the scholars, lawyers, academicians, principals, and professors of various colleges for their active participation throughout these 3 days in the discussions on each paper presentation. Your queries, your opinions made this conference very interactive and wholesome. Thank you very much. Now, an event like this is not an overnight miracle. It was actually, and it is actually a result of meticulous and determined efforts of many people. So I would like to extend my deep sense of gratitude towards all of them. I thank the respected members of Governing Council of Government Law College for their permission to organize this conference. I thank our think tank and the organizing secretary of 3 days international conference, our beloved principal, Dr. Asmita Vaidyaman, for her innovative ideas and constant guidance to make it all happen. I thank all the senior professors, Dr. Rachita Ratho, Dr. Panchbhai, all the professor coordinators of all the technical sessions, and convener, Mrs. Nusrat Sheikh, all the teaching, non-teaching staff of GLC, our entire volunteers team, especially Ms. Ketayun, General Secretary, Students' Council, Mr. Harshal, Technical Head, Ms. Mallika, Logistic Head, Mr. Vishwajit and Mr. Aditya, co-heads of Review and Reporting Committee, and all my dear student volunteers for their relentless work since so many days. Thank you, Miss. I believe that we all will finally have a good night's sleep tonight. Last but never the least, I express my deep sense of gratitude towards all the participants across the globe and each and everyone who made this event a grand success. I also extend my sincere apologies for any inconvenience that may have happened or caused to anyone, or if I might have forgotten to mention your name. I believe that you'll be kind enough to forgive me. In the end, I would like to say in the words of William Shakespeare on farewell, as he writes in Julius Caesar, and I quote, "Whether we shall meet again, I know not. Therefore, our everlasting farewell take, forever and forever farewell. If we do meet, we shall smile. If not, then this parting was well made." I unquote. But I also believe that we will meet again some sunny day when there will be peace and prosperity for all of us, for everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ketayun.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I would now like everyone to please switch on their video cameras so that we can take a quick group photograph. Thank you, everyone. Moving ahead, in tune with our theme for the conference, we would like to play the Pasaidan, which is a prayer for world peace written by Sant Gyaneshwar in the 13th century. He writes for peace and prosperity, not only for human beings, but for all living beings and the whole environment, including non-life sources. Can we please start it? Thank you so much. And before we part, I would like everyone to please rise for our national anthem. Thank you so much for being here, and good evening. Have a good Sunday.